Noam and her team have confirmed that all those who were involved in hitting send on that $59 million payment, I don't think it helps them at all. So I hope that they keep saying the things they are saying and protesting outside government buildings that have been, again, ripping off the American taxpayers. I mean, you had Senator Chris Coons, Democratic, and I love speaking the truth. And I'll tell you, Sean, they are loving the access and the transparency that they are.
The government spends millions to house illegal immigrants, while everyday Americans struggle to make ends meet. This isn't the plot of some dystopian future, but the grim reality we're living in today. And one voice is calling out the madness: Karoline Leavitt. If you've been paying attention to the political scene, you've probably heard of her, former Trump staffer, rising conservative star, and unapologetic truth-teller. But the question is, how did she go from being just another face in the crowd to a political force shaking up Washington? And more importantly, why are her latest revelations making waves so massive they could change the course of American politics? This story begins not with a headline, but with a single, explosive claim: the government is spending your money on terrorists while leaving the American people to fend for themselves. That was the gut punch Karoline Leavitt delivered to the left, and it was just the beginning. Karoline Leavitt wasn't born into a political dynasty, but she certainly made a name for herself in one of the most unforgiving fields of American life, politics. With a background in communications, she quickly caught the eye of the Trump administration. Her fire, conviction, and willingness to speak truth to power made her stand out in a sea of political insiders. Her rise wasn't easy. In a world dominated by career politicians and pundits with their own agendas, Karoline had to fight for her place. But she didn't do it by playing nice. In fact, she made it clear from the start that she wasn't afraid to ruffle feathers. She spoke out against the establishment,
Elon Musk, to cut through the waste, fraud, and abuse that has plagued our federal government for far too long and has
That's how you take responsibility for your actions. You don't just steal money and run. You have to face the consequences. Keep in mind that
hardworking taxpayers. And I think it shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody that that's what Elon is doing at the
even within her own party, and people started taking notice. Her willingness to confront uncomfortable truths set her apart from the typical political candidates we've all seen too many times. And in a political climate dominated by divisive rhetoric and endless media spin, Karoline became a rare voice of clarity, someone willing to take on the hard issues head-on and tell it like it is. But her meteoric rise wasn't just about being bold. It was about speaking to the frustrations of ordinary Americans, people who felt ignored, overlooked, and lied to by the very people they elected to represent them. In the midst of her rise, Karoline Leavitt became a vocal critic of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA. And it wasn't just the usual political complaints we hear every day, it was a bombshell. According to her, FEMA had spent a staggering $59 million on housing illegal immigrants. And while that was happening, people in places like Western North Carolina were living in tents, struggling to find shelter, food, and basic necessities. At first, you might think it's one of those crazy conspiracy theories that you hear once in a while. But Karoline had the receipts. The numbers didn't lie. While American citizens were enduring hardships and struggling to rebuild their lives, millions were being spent on immigrants who hadn't even entered the country legally. This wasn't just a matter of misplaced priorities. It was a direct insult to every hardworking American who thought their government was supposed to have their backs. The media quickly latched onto this revelation, trying to downplay the scandal, but Karoline wasn't having it. She dug deeper, calling out the hypocrisy of the situation. It wasn't just about the money. It was about what that money could have done for Americans. Imagine the schools that could have been built, the hospitals that could have been funded, or the jobs that could have been created if that $59 million had been spent right here at home. But Karoline's attack on FEMA was just one part of the story. You see, she's not alone in this fight. She's aligned herself with two of the most powerful and controversial figures in the world today. Donald Trump
and her team have confirmed that all those who were involved in hitting send on that $59 million payment.
Families of Americans who died there aren't getting squat, but we are paying Taliban families for basically
and Elon Musk. In a time when it feels like everything is stacked against ordinary citizens, these three, Trump, Musk, and Leavitt, represent something bigger. They represent the outsiders, the ones who refuse to play by the old rules. While the left gets bogged down in endless debates and infighting, these three are making their own rules, and they're ready to take on the establishment headfirst. Karoline, once an intern in the Trump administration, has now grown into one of his fiercest defenders. And as the left continues to melt down in response to Trump's bold moves and Musk's revolutionary ideas, Karoline is right there with them, calling out the hypocrisy and the corruption that has plagued Washington for decades. Her allegiance to Trump and Musk doesn't just represent political support, it's a movement to take down the corrupt establishment and replace it with a system that puts the American people first. But the real kicker came when Karoline revealed a fact so disturbing it could make your stomach turn. While American soldiers were sacrificing their lives in Afghanistan, the U.S. government was sending money to the Taliban. Not just any money, millions of dollars. In fact, the U.S. was paying stipends to the families of dead Taliban fighters. Yes, you read that right. The very people who attacked our country were being paid by U.S. taxpayer dollars. This wasn't some small detail buried in a long-forgotten report. No, Karoline exposed it for the world to see. And when she did, it sent shockwaves through the political landscape. Why were we paying terrorists? Why were American families being left to suffer while the families of our enemies were receiving financial support? The outrage was palpable. But instead of backing down or apologizing for her revelations, Karoline doubled down. She called it what it was, a betrayal of the American people. And the media? They tried to bury it, just like they've done with so many other stories. But the truth couldn't be silenced, not anymore. If you thought that was the most disturbing thing Karoline had to say, think again. In another jaw-dropping revelation, she turned her attention to the Federal Reserve, exposing its role in the national debt crisis. Most Americans don't realize that the Federal Reserve isn't even a government entity, it's a private banking cartel. And here's the kicker. It's making $36 million an hour from interest payments on.
But one thing I want Americans to understand is in that bucket of the $40 million we send each week,
President Trump and Elon Musk and our entire administration are going to continue to go line by line and treat
the national debt. You might be wondering, what's the big deal? Well, when you break it down, the situation becomes much more disturbing. The Federal Reserve is profiting off the backs of American taxpayers, while future generations are being saddled with an ever-growing national debt. And that debt? It's hanging over our heads like a time bomb, ready to explode. Karoline made it clear. This system is unsustainable. It's only a matter of time before the whole thing comes crashing down, leaving Americans to pick up the pieces. And the worst part? No one in Washington seems to care. The money keeps flowing to the big banks, while the rest of us are left to suffer. Naturally, the left didn't take kindly to Karoline's fearless exposes. In fact, they've been melting down ever since she made her first appearance on the national stage. The woke media and their allies in Washington have tried everything to discredit her, but Karoline isn't backing down. Every time she speaks, she rattles the foundations of the left's carefully constructed narrative. And with every new revelation, their grip on power weakens just a little bit more. But instead of retreating, Karoline is doubling down. She's not afraid to challenge the left's narrative, no matter how much they scream, shout, and throw insults her way. Her unapologetic stance is resonating with people across the country. Ordinary Americans are fed up with the constant lies and corruption that have taken over the political system. And they're starting to see Karoline as one of the few politicians who is actually willing to speak the truth, no matter the cost. Karoline Leavitt isn't just a politician, she's a movement. She's a voice that's calling out corruption, exposing lies, and holding the powerful accountable. Her words have shaken the political establishment to its core, and there's no turning back now. So what's next? As Karoline continues to rise, it's clear that she's not just a fleeting political figure. She's a force to be reckoned with, someone who isn't afraid to take on the establishment and fight for the American people.